Welcome to TSAT. Today I am going to discuss a topic in environment regarding the structure of the ecosystem. So here, as far as the structure of the ecosystem is considered, in this context, the ecosystem is divided into different layers. So these layers into which the ecosystem is being divided is based upon certain fundamental factors. So the basis on which the ecosystem is divided into certain layers is the layers of this ecosystem are being described as trophic levels. So in this trophic levels, basically fundamentally in general, the ecosystem is being divided into 4 different trophic levels. So the first trophic level is known as the primary producers, and the basis on which the trophic level is being divided is the mode of acquiring nutrition. The way a trophic level acquires energy is the basis on which, or nutrition, a trophic level is being divided into. So for example, trophic level is being defined on the basis of which the organisms living in this level. We have got different species existing in these different levels of the ecosystem. So all the living organisms in a trophic level acquire the energy or nutrition in the same way. For example, trophic level 1, the green layer which is being given at the bottom of the broader layer, when it is considered, they acquire nutrition in the same way. The way they acquire nutrition is, one of the ways is doing photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a process of synthesizing food material by using sunlight, water, carbon dioxide and certain minerals which are being used, absorbed from the soil. Synthesis of food material happens. So all these living organisms are able to prepare their own food material. That is the reason why they are known as autotrophs. Auto means self. So all these living organisms which are capable of preparing their own food materials are considered to be autotrophs, and they are in trophic level 1. All the organisms in the trophic level 1 are being described as primary producers because they produce the food through the process of photosynthesis. They are being described as producers, and they are primary because they are the first in the ecosystem responsible for generating food material. In this process, what happens is, the next level is the primary consumers. Primary consumers are otherwise also known as herbivores. These herbivores feed on only plants. So these are described as primary consumers because they consume food. They are heterotrophs. All these different kinds of trophic levels into which different species live, except these primary producers which are being described as autotrophs, rest of the trophic levels are being described as heterotrophic, means they cannot prepare their own food material. So they depend upon other organisms. So here in the case of primary consumers, they are known as herbivores because their dependence is only on primary producers, that is plants. So the next layer is secondary consumers. These secondary consumers are otherwise also known as carnivores. They depend upon the primary consumers known as the herbivores. So for example, you can consider a lizard or a garden lizard can be given as an example of a secondary consumer. For example, a grasshopper can be given as an example of primary consumer. So when a lizard is feeding on a grasshopper in a secondary trophic level, it is known as secondary consumer. A lizard can be given as an example of a secondary consumer. A garden lizard can be given as an example of secondary consumer. So a bird which is feeding on the insects can be considered as a secondary consumer. So the carnivores live in this secondary consumer. The topmost trophic level consists of the tertiary trophic level. Otherwise, it also contains certain kind of organisms which are being described as predators. A predator is an organism in a trophic level which occupies the highest level in a trophic level, which hunts animals but which cannot be hunted. In the case of a secondary consumer, can be a carnivore, but there is possibility of being hunted. But in the case of tertiary trophic level, which are being described as predators, which cannot be hunted. So in this process, traditionally tigers are being described as predators, or sharks are being described as predators in marine ecosystems. So different organisms exist in different trophic levels in different ecosystems, because ecosystems are classified on the basis of their existence. For example, ecosystems are being classified into terrestrial ecosystems and marine ecosystems, or aquatic ecosystems is further been classified into marine and freshwater. So a predator varies from an ecosystem to ecosystem. For example, in a marine ecosystem, a shark is a predator, but in the case of a terrestrial ecosystem, in a deciduous forest like Telangana, we can consider tiger as a predator. But these predators, the so-called predators which I have given you as an example, have lost their status in the trophic level because we have started hunting these organisms to the level of extinction. So they have lost their status as predators at trophic level 4. We have occupied this trophic level in all the ecosystems. It is not only terrestrial ecosystems, even in the marine ecosystems, we have started hunting sharks, whales, every animal possible. Tiger has been hunted to extinction, so it has lost its status, and we have occupied this. So whether it is a freshwater ecosystem, whether it is a marine environment, whether it is a terrestrial ecosystem or whatnot, every ecosystem at the topmost trophic level is being occupied by a man. So in this process of description of classifying living beings on the way they consume, some are being consumed as omnivores. Omnivores here implies that an animal which can depend upon both on plants and animals, feed on animals and which can feed on plants together, is known as an omnivore. Man is one of the classic example of an omnivore. For example, a dog consumes rice and even meat. For example, in the case of a rat even consumes meat like a fish, a salt fish or an onion. So there are certain omnivorous organisms apart from man, many omnivorous animals. So in this process of this ecosystem structure which is being depicted to you, we need to observe certain phenomena happening here. In this process of consumption of food or for the extraction of energy from one trophic level to another trophic level, the organisms, there is movement of matter and energy. So when a primary consumer like a deer consuming a grass, the mass of trophic level 1 is passing to trophic level 2. At the same time, it is not only just mass transferring from trophic level 1 to trophic level 2, it is also energy. So in this process of transmission of mass and energy, there is certain limitation. The limitation is, you have observed that a pyramid shape where the shape is tapering, where in terms of the biomass and in terms of the energy in a trophic level is gradually reducing. The reason behind it is entropy. Entropy is the energy being consumed by a trophic level for its maintenance. So in this process, what happens is, because the energy being used for the maintenance of the ecosystem is being consumed, the amount of biomass by trophic level to trophic level with the higher trophic levels decreases. For example, when you are breathing out, when you are exhaling air, you can feel your the temperature of the air warmer. The exhaling air is much more warmer when relatively compared with the inhaling air. So from where this air has gained the energy? The air has gained this heat energy because there is a continuous burning process happens in our body. This burning process in the living beings is being described as respiration. So the oxygen you are breathing in, oxygen is essential for combustion. The same way, for the energy to release, the fuel in the blood is the glucose, is being burned by the oxygen you breathe in, releasing energy known as ATP, and it is an exothermic reaction. So here in this context, when the energy is being released, what happens is it is being dissipated into the environment. In this process, when the amount of energy decreases, automatically the biomass decreases. So in this process, because the energy is being used for the maintenance of the system, for the metabolic activities and biological processes, 100% of the energy cannot be transferred. Most of the energy is being consumed for its maintenance. On an average, only 10% of energy can be transferred from trophic level to trophic level. The range varies from ecosystem to ecosystem. The range varies from 8% to 13%, depending upon the capability of a trophic level to transfer the energy from trophic level to trophic level. Because of these reasons, the amount of biomass decreases and the amount of energy in a trophic level gradually decreases with the increasing in the trophic level. So what do you mean by biomass? Bio means life. The weight of the mass of living beings in a trophic level is being described as biomass. So in this context, biomass here, we need to exclude the weight of the water. Dry weight of the biomass we are talking about. So here the amount of energy, for example, 10,000 kilocalories, which is being given here in the projection at trophic level 1. By the time it has been to trophic level 2, the kilocalories of energy has been reduced to just 1,000. See this, on an average it is just 1,000 kilocalories of energy being transmitted. The rest of the 9,000 kilocalories of energy is being used to maintain the system. By the time it has been to trophic level 3, it is just 100 kilocalories. Next to trophic level 4, 10 kilocalories. That is the reason why when you compare the number of tigers with the number of deers in a forest, obviously the number of carnivores like a tiger or a leopard, the number gradually decreases because of decreasing in the biomass, because the amount of biomass and the energy being transferred to the next trophic levels gradually decreases. So in this process of activity of passing of matter and energy across trophic level, ecosystems perform certain functions and they provide certain services. So what are these different services being provided by these ecosystems for the survival of different organisms in the environment? These are the different kinds of services being provided by the ecosystem. So what are the different services being provided by this ecosystem? So this is a service, provisioning services. In these provisioning services, it provides food, fresh water, fuel and fiber. So in this food, fresh water, fuel and fiber, so from where we are getting this food material which we are consuming? These are the food material which we are consuming is being provided by these plants and animals. So for the survival of any organism, ecosystem is providing food to us, without which the survival of any kind of species in an ecosystem doesn't happen, is a service being provided by the ecosystem. Next is the regulating services, for example, carbon sequestration, water purification and flood control. So for example, carbon sequestration. So what do you mean by carbon sequestration? Is a kind of service being provided by this ecosystem. Is carbon sequestration is a process of storing the carbon in a trophic level in a biome. For example, the carbon dioxide present in the environment is a greenhouse gas, causes greenhouse impact. So to avoid these kind of conditions, the carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the plants and it is stored in this biosphere in a huge quantities. so that this carbon sequestration and these biomes acting as a reserve of carbon, which is essential for the survival of living beings, is being stored, avoiding greenhouse impact or global warming. So, carbon sequestration is a function being performed by these ecosystem services. Next, water purification and flood control. So, in this case of flood control, for example, as the forests in the higher elevated regions acts as a sponge to store water because of the existence of roots of the vegetation in the soil in the higher catchment region, helps in percolation of water more vertically down rather than surface runoff because of the pore spaces being provided by the roots of the vegetation. So, in this process, rather than the surface runoff, the vertical percolation of water happens in the catchment region, helping in the water storage capability of an ecosystem, which helps in avoiding floods and consistent supply of water throughout the year, avoiding drought, is another service being provided by an ecosystem, is a regulating a service being provided by an ecosystem. So, next is supporting services, the nutrient cycle, so formation. So, here nutrient cycle here, for example, you have got certain cycle, for example, a carbon cycle or the nitrogen cycle. So, the nitrogen in the atmosphere is not it cannot be absorbed by the plants directly, because nitrogen is the basic essential element required for the construction of any kind of living being, either in the case of plants or animals, because protein is the fundamental, nitrogen is the fundamental element in a protein. Whether it is in the case of plants and animals, they are being constructed with the help of a protein. In the absence of nitrogen, a protein molecule cannot be made. So, the plants can absorb these proteins only when microbes like rhizobium or azotobacter, when they fix the atmospheric nitrogen into the soil, into nitrates, then only the plants can utilize, assimilate the nitrogen. Through plants, we consume the nitrogen and we construct ourselves. So, without this process of recycling of material, any living organism in a trophic level, in an ecosystem, cannot be constructed at all. Next, the other cultural services being provided by this ecosystem is, for example, nature-based recreational, tourism, aesthetic, spiritual or educational values which are being provided by the ecosystem, the tourist development, the kind of psychological boosting it gives you, a pleasantness which it gives you in the process of tourism, is also a service being provided by ecosystems. So, these are all the different kinds of services being provided by the ecosystems. For example, clean air. So, the ecosystems provide you certain kind of pure air by observing carbon dioxide, reduces the amount of pollutants. It provides health by giving certain kinds of medicines. These ecosystems provide you certain services. Next is adequate livelihood is being provided by these ecosystems. Nutritious food, the food which we are consuming, is being provided by the ecosystems. Secure access to resources, so the essential resources for the purpose of development, you name it, what not, the cement or the metal, the concrete, what not, the clothes, every resource, you tell me, the food is extracted from the ecosystem for our survival, is another services. Social relations, so this helps in providing a kind of recreation facilities, helps in developing social relations, because ecosystem provides certain resources and these are not evenly distributed. So, the surplus you have got, you will be exporting to somebody else, the surplus they have got, they will be exporting to you. In this process, you develop a trade, relations, etc. because of these ecosystems. Next is freedom of choice and action. So, you have different resources available and because of which you have got choices. Shelter is being provided by ecosystem, whether it is a natural or an artificial shelter, the resource is being extracted from the ecosystem. So, personal safety, these are all the different kinds of services being provided by ecosystem. When the resources are not being exploited in a proper manner. Without knowing the resilient capability of an ecosystem, in this process of exploitation, what happens is you cross the limit of resilient capacity of an ecosystem in the process of exploitation of resources, the ecosystems completely collapse and it leads to the destruction of ecosystems. In this process, because we are part of an ecosystem, the whole life itself, not just humanity, the whole life itself will be destructed when we don't know how to exploit the resources essential. So, what are the consequences being experienced in India because of improper exploitation of resources? So, climate, in the case of this, climate influences our environment. For example, water level. So, when the amount of water being precipitated is decreasing, what is happening here is the amount of life which can sustain decreases, because the amount of water, the more the amount of water, the more is the life. Less the amount of water, less is the life. Water temperature. So, when the temperature of the water is increasing because of global warming or because of thermal power plants, you are releasing a kind of ballistic water into these rivers which are being superheated, changes the temperature conditions of the freshwater ecosystem, impacting the environment surrounding, impacting the fish breeding conditions there, hatching of the fish or frogs, or the survival of plants in this freshwater ecosystem is being questioned when we are changing the temperature of the water. So, this is how it is being impacted. Ice cover. So, because of the global warming phenomena, the ice cover decreases, melting of glaciers increases, inundation of the low-lying regions happen, systems drying. So, because of decreasing in the precipitation or rainfall, what happens is the river basins dry. When the river basins dry, the hydraulic head of the ocean enters into the coastal regions. The groundwater of the coastal regions are being inundated or intruded by brackish water and salt water. So, the supply of fresh water to these coastal systems fails because of this sedimentation of rivers, because of deforestation. The weathering and erosion increases, silting of river basins and river channels increases, and because of this reason, what happens is the capacity of the rivers to hold water decreases, leading to flooding, because the river overflows very easily when it is being filled with silt. So, pollution runoff. So, when the pollution of these industries are being released into, it leads to destruction of ecosystem. So, dissolving oxygen capability decreases, because when the temperature increases, the oxygen will be turning into gas very easily, making the biological oxygen demand more to this aquatic living organisms, leading to death of plants and animals, leading to a condition known as eutrophication. Eutrophication is a problem. Eutrophication is a problem in ecosystems caused by man. Eutrophication is the decay of these water bodies, lakes especially, because of an artificial supply of nutrients to the plants. For example, the sewage contains nitrogenous materials, which is a nutrition to the plants in the ecosystem, because of which there will be an abnormal growth of the plant biomass disproportionate to animal biomass in an ecosystem. An ecosystem can survive only when there is a proportionate biomass ratio between plant biomass and animal biomass. The reason behind it is, during night time, when the light reaction is stopped, what happens is plants in general, like animals respire, requires oxygen for respiration. So, because this photosynthesis doesn't happen during night time, oxygen is not released. Plants also consume oxygen. So, when plants and animals both consume the oxygen present in the aquatic ecosystem, leading to a condition known as eutrophication, because the biological oxygen demand means the oxygen essential for living organisms for both plants and animals increases, leading to the death of the living organisms, both plants and animals, leading to the decay of the lake, known as eutrophication, is also because of these improper utilization of resources. So here these are all the different kinds of impacts being caused here. For example, threatens the mussel habitat. So, for example, mussels are like snails kind of living organisms existing in the environment. So, these are being impacted because of the change in the temperature conditions. So, in the case of this trophic level structure, for example, this is a trophic level structure in an marine environment. The sharks are occupying the topmost layer. For example, in a marine environment, at the first trophic level, you have got autotrophs like the plankton, phytoplankton, which is pelagic, means floating in the marine environment. And in the shelf zone, we have got rooted plants. So, the rooted plants extending to the shelf zone, which may vary depending upon the shelf zone, extend till 150 meters deep. The width of the shelf zone varies from shelf to shelf. So, in this context, the living plants can survive only in the rooted plants can survive only in the shelf zone because they require light. The penetration of light is being limited to 150 to 200 meters depending upon the transparency of water and the slope gradient of the shelf. Whereas in the case of pelagic phytoplanktons which float, which are available throughout the surface of the ocean, are responsible for generating oxygen. These phytoplanktons and zooplanktons, which are microscopic, unicellular, forms the trophic level 1. They are being consumed by the small fish are being consumed by the larger fish are being consumed by these sharks. So, these are the different trophic levels. So, they may ask you what are the different organisms existing in different trophic levels. For example, krill consists of prawns, shrimp kind of organisms. Small fish consists of the primary consumers in marine environment, and primary producers in marine environment consists of rooted plants in the shelf zone and phytoplanktons, and the predators at the trophic level 4 in marine environment is sharks. So, in the same way, the type of organisms in different trophic levels varies from ecosystem to ecosystem. For example, in the case of tropical deciduous forests, what are the organisms existing in different trophic levels? The primary producers consist of fruit trees, deciduous trees, berry bushes, ferns constitutes the primary producers. In these primary producers, the secondary consumers like leopards, the primary consumers like deer, the primary consumer leopards, etc. are secondary consumers. The primary consumers consist of deers and herbivorous animals constitutes the primary consumers. On these primary consumers, the secondary consumers depend upon, like tiger, lion or leopard, depend upon these primary consumers. And the man who is occupying the topmost trophic level in the process of deforestation, destroying the forest and hunting the animals, is occupying the topmost position in the trophic level 4, even in the deciduous forest. We need to know the different components of an ecosystem. For example, the different components of an ecosystem are being classified into physical components, chemical components, biotic components, etc. So, in a question, they may ask you to differentiate a physical component and a chemical component. So, these are the examples of physical components of an ecosystem: the sunlight, shade, the solar flux. So, the intensity of the solar energy is not the same throughout the latitudes. The solar flux is more at the equator and less at the polar regions. The temperature, wind direction, latitude, longitude, soil types, water availability and ocean currents. These are all different examples of physical components of an ecosystem. The different chemical components of an ecosystem which influences the trophic levels are the carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur, toxic substances, salts, various organic substances, soil, water. These are all can be given as an example of chemical factors of an ecosystem. Biotic factors means all the living organisms constitutes the biotic factors. So, the plants which are the largest at the equator are considered as the megatherms. Mesoderms means medium types of vegetation. Microderms means algae, grass together are being classified as microderms in an ecosystem. All the biotic components of ecosystem influence the abiotic components. So, there is a continuous interaction between biotic and abiotic components of an ecosystem. So, the major functional attributes of an ecosystem are food chain, food web, trophic structure, energy flow. So, this ecosystem structure is responsible for the flow of matter, the flow of energy, the cycle of material in terms of nutrient cycles of nitrogen, water cycle, phosphorus cycle, etc. by observing from one trophic level to another trophic level through primary and secondary production. So, this helps in regulating the ecosystems. These are all the different attributes of an ecosystem. So, in this ecosystem is made up of food chain and food web. So, food chain is actually to make us understand to understand the levels of trophic levels in schooling when we are not matured enough to understand. Food chain is a theoretical aspect where different trophic levels are being attributed are given, where energy flows from one trophic level to another trophic level, or biomass transfers from one trophic level to another trophic level for the purpose of understanding. But actually in the ecosystem, trophic levels are made up of, an ecosystem is made up of many number of food chains intertwined. So in the case of a food chain, just you have a frog eating on the insects, feeding on the insects, a snake feeding on the frog, and this is a simple way of understanding, but actually it is very a complex one, where in the case of food web, food chain is in the case of food web, it is made up of many interlinking food chains leading to the form of a food web. A food web is a network of food chains across trophic levels. For example, this is the real way the trophic levels exist in. So, the biodiversity is the existence of different species in a trophic level. The more the biodiversity, the more stable is the ecosystem, because when the function of a species is lost because of the extinction, the second species can come into action to perform the function. When the biodiversity is decreasing, the ecosystem becomes fragile and collapses. So, that is the reason why we need to protect the environment and biodiversity, because the more the biodiversity, the more stable is the ecosystem. In this process of consumption and survival of these different trophic levels, it leads to biomagnification and bioaccumulation. So here in this process, because of the pollution, when the animals are feeding on the plants which have got toxins, and when the primary consumers are being fed by secondary consumers, in this process the pollutants which have been released gradually accumulate across trophic levels. So this phenomena of accumulation of toxics trophic by trophic level is known as biomagnification. When it is being accumulated only in a single organism in its lifetime, it is known as biomagnification. This is the difference between biomagnification and bioaccumulation. Okay, thank you friends. We shall meet in the next session discussing a different topic in environment. Thank you.